Thank you so much for joining us today, Rob. We're really grateful to have you with us. And we're here to talk about how we can become more inclusive in the workplace for people with disabilities. So perhaps we could start with your story and the experiences that you have gone through, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about that.
Let's start with the best bit. So I've been married for 35 years. I have two grown-up daughters. I've spent a long career in information technology, working at starting with Xerox, Procter & Gamble, Novartis, and the last 5 years at Adecco, all of them leaders in their respective fields. And 4 years ago, actually, on a Win for Youth triathlon, I had a bit of bad luck. I had an accident on my bike, which was very serious. I hit a brick at a wall at about 50 kilometers an hour, but fortunately survived it, but it left me paralyzed from the waist down. So a life-changing event for me, one with many, many challenges, but a new purpose for me now, in terms of our focus today is how can we help people with spinal cord injuries, both in the workplace and employment, but also in terms of their caregivers, which is a real challenge as well. So new motivation and a new impact, not what I expected, but nevertheless one that's very rewarding.
Absolutely. And it's, we've all heard your story, and it's absolutely an incredible story. And when we talk about disability inclusion across the workplace, but also governments and societies, in your opinion, are we improving enough here? Have we made enough progress? And what can we do to do more?
There are many things today that we see, depending on the country you're in and the company that you're in, where we can say, yes, the general direction is good. There is more that we can do, but we shouldn't kid ourselves that we'll solve every problem for people with disabilities. If there's one thing I've learnt is no two people that have a disability have the same problem or challenge. Mm-hmm. Okay, no two disabilities are the same, and I think this is something that we sometimes take for granted. So I think there's good progress being made, but more to do.
And from your perspective, what are the key things that companies can do to drive more inclusion for people with disabilities?
Providing opportunities for people with employment is incredibly important. And I think then once people are in the workforce, people that have disabilities, it's just trying to help make an environment where they can contribute of their best and they feel comfortable.
Growing on that point more, we speak about organizational structure and systemic change that we can drive, but from an individual perspective, if we think about our colleagues and our peers in the workplace, what can we do at an individual level to support?
I think it's about familiarity and it's about dialogue. So it's about getting to know somebody. I'm the same person I was before my accident as I am right now. Those people who know me really well will tell you that, Sarah. But when we have people in the workplace and they have disabilities, all problems that anybody may experience are manageable if there's an open dialogue and if there's a caring. Okay? And for that to happen, I believe you have to be familiar. I had a physio I used to go through before my accident that I now go to afterwards. And he has a young boy who's 10 years old, Jean-Luc. And I remember being on the physio table and, I'm paralyzed from the chest down. And this little boy walks in and he walked straight up to me and he looked me in the eye and he said, "Hoi," in Swiss German, "What happened to you?" And I couldn't believe this. It was like, and for me, it was like, great. Well, this is what happened to me, Jean-Luc, my terrible German. And then I said to his dad, I said, "Wow, I've not experienced that." And when I was a little boy, I would never have gone up to somebody with a wheelchair and said hello and leave alone, "What happened to you?" And I said, "How did that happen?" And he said, "Look, I've just taught him since he was a little boy that if he sees somebody on the street and he wants to know what happened, go and ask them." And he doesn't worry about that right now. And I think that's kind of part of what it's all about. It's being able to go up to someone and try and make a connection. And maybe that person doesn't want to talk to you, But you have that, right, with people who are not disabled, okay? And so I think it's just reaching out and trying to make a connection. And many people ask me, sometimes, do you need help, Rob? No, I'm fine, thank you. But there are times where I really do need help, and I have to acknowledge that. I think we all, right, and I wish I did this better before my accident, to try and make more of a connection and get to know people. And then when that happens and you can have a dialogue, any problem is, solvable.
And one of the things we often hear from people very honestly is that sometimes they're scared to join that dialogue and to demonstrate that curiosity in case they say the wrong thing or ask the wrong question and unintentionally offend. What would be your advice to them? How would you encourage them to participate in that dialogue, maybe make a mistake? What are the things that you would advise them to do?
I used to manage quite large organizations, and I had one guy in a wheelchair in the US, and he reached out to me after my accident. And I said to him, hey, look, people have given me a lot of pats on the back for efforts around diversity inclusion, particularly with women in technology, which has been a problem. And, of course, I feel good about that. And we've come a long way, still more to do. But I said, I wish I'd done more about disability inclusion. I just didn't know anything about it, and I didn't feel comfortable. And he said, Rob, you had me in your organization, and every time I came to Basel, you always said hello. Mm-hmm. And he said, you don't understand that small gesture, how important that was. And, in reflecting on that, I wish I did a lot more. I have a lot more connection today now with people with disabilities. It's very natural. They all have their own superpowers, right, which is a whole other topic. People with disabilities have to be very resilient to survive. And that is a superpower that, especially in the workplace, can be really tapped into to great effect. I have many examples.
I love that, absolutely. And every act, no matter how small, makes a difference. What are the key takeaways you would have for people listening to this conversation? What is the one or two things you would like them to take away from this conversation?
Step number one is, reach out, make a connection, or give somebody the opportunity. I think that's it. I think number two is no amount of policies will solve every single problem. It's open dialogue that will do that. I think that's incredibly important. And then number three, I think I'd like people to think about this concept of, because of the challenges that people with disabilities deal with, they have certain superpowers that I certainly have seen firsthand that make them an incredible asset for any team or any company, right? So it actually makes good business sense if you can get the right people with the right backgrounds, whether they're disabled or not, in the right slots. If I may share an example, there's an IT leader that I worked with for many years, and he's kind of the CIO of a very large pharmaceutical company. And he's just hired 30 people who are autistic to do testing on coding, right? And he's got a 50% performance improvement over people that are non-disabled. Okay? So he's found a way of working, right, with a certain segment of disability, where he's got a workplace where they've welcomed them into the fold, and they're getting great results out of that as well, which must be wonderful for him, is wonderful for the company, is wonderful for those people that are involved, and it's just a lovely story, right? So I think that's an example in the third sense of what people can do and feel good about.
Absolutely. All amazing advice and something I hope that everybody can take away with them. Finally, just want to say thank you. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us today and to have this conversation. And I really appreciate you taking the time.
Pleasure is very much mine. Thank you, Sarah.